Welcome to insurance. This is Jim. As you can see, Jim is extremely distressed and upset because he loves his car and his car has recently been in an accident. As we can see, while the person is drawing this beautiful car, it is not in the best of shape. And he has asked you to explain to him, with your knowledge of insurance, what are some of the factors that he will have to consider in order to get his money out to replace the car that he so dearly loves? So, what are three things we need to consider before we can even think about anything else? Jim needs to think back to when he signed the contract. And the first thing he has to ask himself was, did he act in absolute good faith? Now, Jim is not 100% sure what this means, but absolute good faith means Jim was completely honest about his dealings with the insurer and did not hide anything that was relevant. Obviously, he doesn't have to tell them what color socks he's wearing or where he is going with the car, but if he is going to park it in a garage, he has to tell them it is parked in the garage. He cannot lie and say, no, I live in Fairlands when he actually lives in the middle of Kyalami. Okay, he has to have absolute good faith with him, and he is relatively sure that he was completely honest with them. The second thing he has to think back to is, was he in a contractual capacity to sign the contract? So Jim is obviously wearing a tie, and only people over 18 wear ties, so we can consider Jim to be over 18. Check for the first thing. But contractual capacity does not only refer to age, but also to people with Alzheimer's or any other mental, let's don't want to say disability, but disorder. So someone who is on drugs also is not in a mental capacity. And Jim is relatively sure that he was not on drug for this period, so you can be relatively sure that he is of a contractual capacity when he signed this. Now, while we're finished, what do you think the last thing is? The last thing is, did he have insurable interest for this contract? Did he stand to lose something financially from this contract or when he took out the insurance? Obviously, for most people, the car is one of their most valuable assets. If you don't have a car, you don't have transport, you can't get to work, and you definitely stand to lose something. So he also knows that it was his car, it was in his name, the registration is in his name or at least in a family member's name who lives in the same household. That sometimes does apply. So he can definitely say with that there's insurable interest. So before you can even go any further, you as your own have to ask yourself, did I act in absolute good faith? He did in this case. He was honest with what he's dealing. Was I of a contractual capacity? Yes, he was. He's over 18 and he was sound of mind. But the one that is the hardest to sometimes figure out is when you've got to ask yourself if you have something to lose or not. Ask yourself, if this asset was taken away from the person, would they be in a worse position than if they had the asset with them? Obviously, if you had the car, you'd be in a better position to travel around, so we can say he did have absolute or insurable interest. Now the cops come in and they have to determine a couple of things. The first thing that they have to consider is, what was the proximate cause of this crash? Okay, if it was, for example, someone had a heart attack, your insurer might not pay out because it actually falls under medical insurance because the proximate cause of the accident was your heart attack. So that would be the first thing that they'd have to decide as the police. So the proximate cause is the initial cause. Remember, what was the first thing that went wrong? So then you'd also look at something like negligence. So they look at, was it you who won your cell phone? Say if you were, then you are obviously held liable for all the damages. And then they see which one caused the accident, and that's the guilty party. In South Africa, if you rear end someone, the one at the back is always the guilty party and always has to pay out. Now, this means that if Jim was not the guilty party, it means that his insurance will still have to pay out, but then they take the right of subrogation, meaning that they now have the legal right to claim this money back from the insurer of Dave who rear-ended Jim. So this is the second thing you'd have to consider is it a case where the right of subrogation is allowed to the party? So if it was a complete accident and no one's fault, the insurances will pay out and no one will get fitted with the whole bill. But if it was found that one person was negligent, was on their cell phone, or skipped a red robot, then the insurer has the right of subrogation and Jim's insurer can claim it back from the person who caused the accident's insurer. So these are the two things that you have to consider during the cause of the accident. So you've got to consider now, okay, if all of these things line up and there was a proximate cause, the insurer will pay out if these conditions were adhered to. So this is obviously the second thing you look at. Now the last thing you look at is you look at the car itself. You look at the car before it was insured, and what was the actual value of the car that was given to you? So you've got to look at the value. What if the value was a high value of 30 million, for example? Oh, that's a bad example. Let's say 300,000. Okay, if that was the actual value of the car, and you insured it for 400,000, we call this over insurance, meaning that the asset was valued for more than it was actually, or insured for more than it is actually valued, meaning that the insurer will pay everything out. But you have spent a lot more on premiums than you actually should have. And the main reason for this is generally that the assets have depreciated over time and you did not take this into consideration, and therefore you've paid more than you actually should have. Okay, if the car is only worth 100,000, you should be insuring it for about 110,000 just to be safe. Okay, so this is where you would get a foreign expert. You have to take into consider depreciation. But obviously the inverse can also be true. So let's say you insured it for 800,000 instead of 1 million. It's a million rand car and you insured it for 800,000. This is called underinsurance, and this means that if you only insured it for 80% of the value, they will only pay out 80% of your claim. And the reason this happens is people don't actually know the value of their assets. So the main strategy, as it were, that you could pull out here is to say that I would like a foreign expert or an outside expert, let's not say foreign, let's say an outside expert to evaluate all our assets for us. Someone who works with the value, and that's where bank evaluators come in. Oftentimes, banks send out their evaluators to evaluate things when they want to send out a loan to make sure that it's the same. And insurance can do the same. They can send out an external evaluator to make sure that everything is valued properly. Now, obviously, the house is a little bit different. I hope that this helped explain some of the concepts and that